Welcome back. It's Tuesday night, and this is Vetted VA Live. I am joined by three experts, and usually we have lending experts. Tonight we've got realtors. So your mileage may vary. We'll see. They are experts, and we have a topic here: listing your home during a PCS season in a challenging market. And challenging can mean different things in different parts of the country right now. We have a sort of bipolar market. Depending on where you are, things are moving slowly or they're moving quickly. And we're going to go through all of that, of what you need to know and how to manage the season. So Alexis, I see you wanting to share with us. So someone gets their PCS orders, they have their house, and they got to get rid of it. What's the first step? When the phone rings and someone tells you that, what direction are you taking the conversation?
Well, the first thing is don't wait till you have your orders. When you're PCSing, you want to reach out to an agent as soon in advance when you think you might be PCSing. Okay. So when you buy, it's typically best maybe to softly explore options, wait till you have hard orders. When you are moving, it's best to reach out to the agent well in advance. Especially if you're in a duty station that can maybe be isolated, or in a duty station with a smaller installation area, meaning the base isn't that big. It would probably be best to reach out to the agent way in advance. It's not uncommon for me to for my potential sellers to reach out to me about a year in advance. So there's that.
Is there ever an answer where it's too early? Like my answer is no. There's no such thing, right? 2 years, 5 years, whenever you think you have questions, reach out to your real estate or mortgage professional and go through them. That's what we're here for. My biggest frustration is when people try and answer their own questions, either through AI or on the internet, and get crazy wrong answers. So by all means, do some research, but reach out to your pros. Jason, is that pretty similar timeline? What are your expectations when someone is needing to sell home?
6 months is probably pretty average. We've definitely gone a year. A lot of the buyers that we work with, especially like officers, because officers are only typically stationed for about 2 years here in San Diego. So when we're actually working with them to buy, we're kind of like, hey, what's the plan in 2 years? Because in our current market, 2 years, you're probably not going to be able to turn around and sell it and break even. So we need to start thinking about, like, are you going to rent it out? Like, kind of strategizing on how to buy, so that when, hey, I'm PCSing and it's not a surprise, we know it's going to happen, especially, active duty, plan for it in advance.
You just brought up a really important topic on this. And if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, I think it would have been different. When rates are 3.5% and you have a 3.5% rate and you get PCS'd out somewhere else, you go, I don't care. I sell it. I'm gonna go get another 3.5% interest rate. How does that change sort of this dynamic and this calculus when you may have a spectacular COVID era interest rate and you're looking at a very different interest rate and possibly different price point in that new duty station? Alexis, how are you walking through that with clients?
Well, I'm going to tell you this. I don't care what interest rates are. You better have your house ready, because even during the COVID market, homes that were lacking things, instead of getting 40,000 more like they should have, they only got 20. So you still need to reach out early to discuss strategy, because oftentimes in real estate, and a lot of agents that are watching this know this, Jason, I know you do. Almost daily, I encounter homes when I'm showing buyers that if the seller just maybe would have thrown $2,000 at the house, they would have 20,000 more. Okay. So definitely, regardless of what interest rates are, you have to have your house ready. Your house is only worth what a buyer is willing to pay. So that's it, regardless of interest rate.
So hold on to that thought, because I want to come back to that, because I think that there's so many things that on the loan side that little hinges swing big doors. We can show you better ways to structure things both in the short and the long run. But I think that what you just said, a little bit of money spent on the front end can get you a big return in a short time frame, and it compounds over time. Really, my thought with that, Jason, are you seeing any more people saying, well, I don't know if I'll ever get this wonderful interest rate again? So you're in San Diego. Maybe I got a cool house here in a great climate in San Diego. I'm going somewhere else. I may buy or rent there, but I'm thinking more along the lines of keeping this house versus selling, and wanting to know what that looks like, whether it's property management, what they can rent it for, what the realities of that look like when we have folks that may be concerned they won't ever get access to one of those interest rates again.
100%. I mean, people are really they might have bought the house for the house, but now they're living in the house because of the rate. You know what I mean? And especially when they're having a PCS and they're like, man, this house is pretty decent. I like the house, but I don't want to give up the rate. So it's definitely a conversation. One of the very first things I asked them is, did you like staying in San Diego? A lot of people either, they love California or they don't like California, and that's perfectly fine. But my question is, do you have a plan to come back here? Right? Because keeping your place and establishing your foot in the door makes it a whole lot easier to come back here. If you move to Tennessee or you move to Connecticut, somewhere where it's a lower cost of living, you might have like a 3,000-4,000 square foot home, and you sell all that and then look at the new price to buy here in San Diego. The sticker shock is just going to be, it's mind blowing. So if you keep that place, rent it out while you're gone and come back, it's kind of establishing a foothold while the appreciation continues. You're kind of still going up. That's one of my very first questions is, hey, do you plan to come back here? If you don't ever plan to come back to California, then it really comes down to like numbers. Hey, California charges a 7% tenant tax. So if you do not live in California, do file as a resident, so you're living in Hawaii, maybe a resident of Hawaii or whatever, they charge you an additional 7% rental tax that the property managers are required to charge. Well, that's really going to cut down on top of your property management fee. So knowing that information really kind of helps them, like, hey, have you thought about selling your home, taking that equity and maybe buying an actual investment property and maybe at your home state, whatever, and then you freeing up your VA loan and, buying your dream home in Tennessee or wherever you're PCSing.
So as part of this process, that whole getting ready to get ready, whether it's 6 months, a year ahead of time, Rocky, how early are you engaging with people in terms of their financing and saying, hey, I'm going to be getting orders and this is where we think we're going and what it looks like in a timeline? How does that change the conversation versus possibly a recently discharged veteran looking to buy their first home or your standard buyer?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, people would reach out way in advance, talk through all the possible scenarios, whether it's they're PCSing here to Michigan or another state or what the possibilities are. We look at the overall financial picture, but unfortunately, that's usually not the case. But I'd say the most perfect time is doing that 30, 60, 90, right? So just like, let's start at least 90 days before. Let's check in again, 60, and then 30 days before we're about to pull the trigger, you need to buy something. I always try to maintain that type of game plan with my clients.
And if it's someone that owns and is looking to list, like we're kind of going through tonight, how does that change? So either like walk us through, hey, they want to rent. What does that conversation look like when they're possibly renting that departing residence? And what is VA? How does it differ from other loan types? And then also, what does it look like if we're going to list it and we have some proceeds and now it kind of changes the dynamic of the purchase process?
Yeah. So, I mean, for the most part, people have a pretty good idea of what they want to do with the departing residence. For the most part, they know, hey, we're just going to offload it. We're going to get rid of it and just roll over the proceeds, or I'm going to invest most of it into the, stock market. I'm going to put it down on the new house, blah, blah, blah. But there always is another case where people want to rent out the property. And of course, you have to have somewhat of an idea of what it is like to be a landlord, right? So if you are getting into new uncharted territory, you probably don't want to just jump into it head first. As you know, it's not cut and dry as other products.
Well, one of the big misconceptions, right? People go, hey, my payment's $2,800. I know I can rent this thing for 29 at least. Yeah. So it washes. It's good, right? So from that perspective, how does it actually work with the VA guidelines? If you have a rent amount that's similar or just slightly above or even slightly below what the mortgage payment is going to be.
So, I mean, you want to take into account a lot of things, even if necessarily the guidelines are not making you take these things into account, right? If you're not going to be able to manage the property yourself, if you have a property management company, they're going to be taking a good amount. You also need to account for the fact that the homestead exemption is going to be removed, so the property taxes will most likely be going up. I know that's definitely the case in Michigan. I'm not sure how that all works in many or all states throughout the United States. So I always like to game plan with my clients and let them know, hey, these are the things that are going to change. You're going to have to pay 8 to 12% to a property management company. That's going to come off the top. And usually that number also changes, right? In the end, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to pay the monthly payment every month. I'm going to have to put in $200, $300. Do you guys see this same type of scenario you have to walk people through, or is it kind of different?
Different.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely walk them through, if they're looking at rent. I used to run property management, and just because of that, so I kind of know the laws in California. And so we typically will walk through a lot of the hidden fees and just give them a really good example of what it looks like to actually rent a place here. The tenant laws are very favorable, and not so favorable for landlords. So
favorable to the tenant.
Yeah, exactly. Very favorable to the tenant, not to the landlord. So, being aware of all those nuances in that, plus the taxes in that, and then saying, hey, this is what it looks like to sell, and ultimately kind of showing them, hey, here's plan A, here's plan B, and maybe here's plan C, where it might be, hey, I rent for a little bit and then I sell, like a year or two down the road or whatever. So that that's kind of my outlook, at least. I'll let Alexis go, because I know her market's drastically different.
Well, I think one of the important things you say, we'll let Alexis give us her 2 cents, and she will whether we allow her to or not. But in terms of that, you said hidden costs, right? I think when most of the time when people reach out and they think in terms of keeping that property, they don't account for all of the little things that are going to be there. So it's really important that you do talk to a realtor or an agent or a property manager or a lender that does have experience with it, where you can kind of walk through it and see what those numbers look like. But Alexis, you have both experiences from being from San Diego and high cost area, Tennessee, a little bit more reasonable area. Does that look a little bit different in other parts of the country where rents are more likely to cover the payment in other parts of the country?
No, they're not. Actually, it's not. It's not, fellas. It's not as cheap here as you think. And also, I'll just say, Tennessee's not a tenant-friendly state. You could be a slumlord here, right? What you don't want to be if you're military, okay? You need to take care of your renters in there. But there's a lot to talk about. But since we're talking about, get list ready for PCS, rent's part of it. It's best to position your house to be in a favorable condition to where you can attract a buyer and not a renter, right? So Jason talked about in San Diego, officers, for example, are 2 years. I'm at Navy admin headquarters. So here, admin officers do multiple tours. Every duty station is going to be different. You know what it's like for your tour where you are. So stick to what the norm is there, right? And kind of go off from that, and keep that in mind too when you're purchasing. But if your intent is to sell, whether you just don't want to be in the area anymore, you don't see yourself coming back, or if you do come back, you don't want to live in that house, right? Sometimes when you're PCSing, you find yourself perhaps settling for a house. And if you do find yourself back in the area, you're like, I don't want to be over here in this school district, or I want to be over here, right? So best positioning your house to be list ready for PCS is, what the show's all about tonight, right?
Well, 100%. And that kind of takes us full circle back to your point before of saying, fully being list ready versus, oh, hey, we got to sell our house. Let's throw a sign in the yard and there's crap everywhere. And you're like, what are we doing? So what does that look like? What does that preparation checklist of the whole 9 yards of what sellers should be doing to maximize their potential for profit?
Well, actually, it kind of starts when you first buy your house. Make sure you're buying in an area. You're going to have to rely on your boots on the ground agent. Make sure you're buying in an area that's going to be sought after, desirable. For every area, that's going to change drastically. It's going to vary. Here in my area, like most areas, school districts rule. School districts control the real estate market, public schools. Okay. The thing that's nice is since COVID, since about 22, at least in my area and probably most markets across the country, there's data for the last 3 or 4 years that show if the neighborhood's trending up or down. So before buying a house, you should have looked at that, right? So if you're somebody, let's say, who bought in 23 and you're about to PCS here since it's 26, 36 months later, your very first step is you should have already spoken to a real estate agent. If you haven't, you need to make that phone call. Everything starts with the exterior of the house. What does the outside look like? You got one shot. This is online dating. You got one shot for somebody to either swipe to the left, swipe to the right, schedule an appointment. So making sure that you're looking the best that you can at the door is going to be important, because typically the first picture is the exterior picture, right, Jason? Right? That's what gets people in. So making sure that the exterior, the curb appeal is there. When they first come into the house, making sure that things look good. If you bought the house and you knew that something looked funky or wonky, it's going to look funky or wonky when it's time for you to sell. So make sure that those things are taken care of. But before putting money into the house, if you did not already discuss with the real estate agent when you purchased, you need to discuss with the listing agent when you're interviewing listing agents, or however you're going to go about it, to make sure that, especially if you're like 6 months out from listing, the money that you're putting to the house, are you actually going to get a return on investment? Because earlier we just spoke at length about renting potentially, right? You can easily throw $10,000 at a house, your house doesn't sell, and then you end up renting it out. Well, you're just out that $10K, because in my area and other areas of the country, you could, just because a rental looks nice doesn't necessarily mean you get $600 more for it, right? So definitely having that conversation early and as soon as possible with your real estate agent. How can I ensure return on investment for this money that's going to get back? Just like in lending world, you'll hear lenders all the time on our lives talk to a lender before you start paying down debt, right? Well, when you're about to list your house, talk to a real estate agent about, hey, where in this house can I put money where I'm for sure going to see a return? Some people focus on things that are small and insignificant, right, Jason? Like, they're like, oh yeah, let me come over here and change out all these cabinets. Nobody cares about those cabinets. Paint them up, sand them up, get them to work. You won't see your return. It just depends on the house, but definitely talk to your real estate agent as early as possible. I don't want to get long-winded here, Josh. So
well,
back a little bit.
No, you're good. And I think we're talking sort of a lot about the aesthetics of the home, which seems obvious, but if you've spent any time on Zillow or Redfin looking at pictures, you know that it's not obvious to everyone. Jason, do you suggest, say at this point in the process, a pre-purchase inspection, a home inspection before the buyer gets around to it, or is that something that you stay away from?
I would say that it depends on the market. I would ask your real estate agent. We've done them on certain houses that were kind of unique in that, where we've asked the seller, let's do a pre-inspection. That way we can kind of provide it up front. And then there's others that we just run it like normal. It just really kind of depends on the house. However, it is a great time that you go back to your home inspection that you did pay for when you got it, when you bought the home like 2-3 years ago, and maybe go through that and just make sure, that the safety aspects of the home are covered, right? In California, we love earthquakes. So, make sure the earthquake straps on like the hot water heater. Some of that stuff is really super easy, cookie cutter. And we see it hit all the time. And those are just some small things that don't really cost that much, that especially if you're DIY, you can easily bust out. And it's just something you can get out of the way. Because as you were once a buyer, especially a first-time home buyer, you were probably scared when you saw that, 30, 40, 80-page inspection report. And you're like, oh my goodness, my house is going to fall down. You bought the house knowing that you thought it was going to fall down, and then you ended up living there and maybe only took care of 1 or 2 things, and life's gone on. So I think that's a good thing. One thing I would add to what Alexis said, make sure the home's clean. I don't know how many times we've gone to sell homes. Like, I'm not talking like, hey, I did my Saturday field day. No, I mean, this thing has got to be, white glove clean. It shows in photos. It shows when a person comes in to buy the home, and you kind of setting that standard. You don't want to see dog hair. You don't want to see trash cans full. Make sure the home is clean, especially for photos. If you're going to spend money, and especially if you had animals or you were a little bit hard living, had kids, whatnot, and you have carpet, carpet's cheap. Put some new carpet in there, throw some new white paint on, or some, off-white paint, whatever the case may be. But, give it a little polish, make that thing shine, because that's going to go a lot further than new cabinets, or the Bluetooth vent fan in the bathroom that I had one seller, was like, hey,
wanted to make sure he got full value for the Bluetooth vent
I was
fan?
Like, I don't think you're going to get any value for a Bluetooth vent fan. I mean, that's kind of cool, I guess, but
Clean. I mean, there's almost two pieces to it. Clean. My wife and I were watching. Have you guys seen the show His and Hers on Netflix? It's not. It's just a show. But we watch the scene. They walk into a house, and I'm like, the house is clean. The house is tidy. I'm like, that house stresses me out because it looked like someone who super just clutter. They had little tchotchkes everywhere. They had wallpaper. And you look at all those things and you really need to think, hey, I love this. I love living here, but is this how most people live? Is this what most people are going to like? Because when you're there, by all means, it's your castle. You make it the way you want. But when you're getting ready to leave, you really want it to be as attractive to everyone. Rocky, I'm going to pull you in on this one because I don't want these two to sound like they're tooting their own horns. But we work with a buyer, and if I have a veteran buyer and they tell me they've got some rando realtor, their uncle who knows nothing about VA loans or the process is going to represent them, what is the value of having an agent who is not just an experienced, excellent agent, but is experienced and well-versed in the VA loan program?
I mean, it's invaluable to have a realtor that is well-versed on all things VA and one that can work symbiotically with the loan officer. You can't put a price on that. It's just amazing. It makes for a seamless process and way less stress. I'm not to say that, it can get done with a realtor that is not well versed in it, but yeah, you're just going to be so better far off. Yeah.
I think the piece is, I don't know, it's kind of like the 80-20 rule. 80% of transactions are going to go smooth and be relatively simple. There's not some curveballs. So when you find out whether you have an experienced realtor that understands the VA loan program, if you're in the 20% on either end, that kind of gets a little bit dicey, a little bit hairy, something weird that comes up. The big one for us is that it's when you get in a really tight market and there's multiple offers, very easy for agents and sellers to look down their nose at VA through ignorance, through VA offers, through ignorance. So it is really, really important that the agent is able to stress that and understand that. But really, we're talking tonight about listings. So from that perspective, Alexis, what is it in the listing process for a veteran getting PCS? Why is it important that their agent understand that process and not just the great local agent who's on every bus stop?
Well, now, while y'all know I'm VA heavy, I will say when it comes to listing, you get an agent who's well-versed on all loan types, FHA too. I'm in a mid-rise city, right? Memphis isn't too big. On my listings, I encounter a lot of FHAs. A lot on my listings is when I get them. It's important to understand sellers that a FHA, while it's a similar loan type like VA, it's 180 days on that appraisal, right? We talk a lot about embedded VA about appraisal process when you're buying. Sellers are often concerned about appraisals too, especially if there's a tight margin like Jason talked about, or I touched on earlier. We don't have a lot of equity left in the house. You need to know what it's looking like to list your house for, right? And if you can bring in that value, making sure your house looks good, smells good, and all that jazz is great. But remember, a lender, regardless of loan types, not giving a penny more than what that house appraises at. So the process overall, when it comes to having a VA loan expert agent assist you on the list side, that's beneficial if you're exploring putting your house up with an assumption, right? So let's say you bought in 21, 22, rates were lower. That's great. You have someone well-versed, but they really need to be well-versed in everything. So definitely when you're sitting down speaking to that agent, the list agent, you need to have that conversation. USDA is big in my area too. Down payment assistance programs, depending on where you are. These are scenarios and loan types that typically military families don't encounter when they're interviewing agents for buying. Right. I mean, Jason, you see FHA. I know FHAs are definitely a thing, right? On lending, at least. USDA, understanding that when there's a government shutdown, how long that's going to last. If you're trying to do USDA or FEMA flood cert, if you're in a flood zone. So, yeah. Well,
Alexis, you brought up something really important. Yeah. Assumptions are like purple unicorns. You hear about them, but no one's ever seen one except within this context, right? Yeah. Who is likely to see an assumption? If you're in an active duty area, you got people PCSing in and out, far more likely that an assumption can actually happen versus out in the wild when you're 1,000 miles from any military base and it's just rando veteran is going to show up and assume it. Yeah. No, it could be a regular person, but they're far less common. But is that what you guys see, that in active duty stations near military bases that you're seeing this happen a little bit more than what we may see out in the wild?
I see them here, Tennessee, here where I'm in Memphis, which is Shelby County. There's a small base, very small Navy base, maybe about 1,000 active duty. However, Shelby County is home to the largest veteran population in the state of Tennessee. We have about 85. I think it's about 85,000. So we have a large veteran population. You know, Detroit, there's certain parts of the country where there's no base. LA, there's not a base, but there's a lot of people join out of those areas. So I've encountered assumptions off, like, from just veterans. Nobody, you know, they did 4 years, got out, you know, so you can kind of run into them anywhere, Josh, actually. But if you are in an area that's not heavy with military, having an agent who's well-versed in assumptions could help you potentially sell your house. If nothing else, is going to get foot traffic in that door. Okay. Every time I list a house and we advertise an assumption rate that is lower, you know, a point and a half lower, a percentage lower than what current rates are, we're getting people in the door. I'm getting people on the phone asking their FHA, but I'm breaking down what's going on with the house and telling them, hey, you know, while your client, they're non-veteran, perhaps they don't qualify for the assumption, it's still a great house. You know, it still gives me an opportunity to talk to an agent or talk to a prospective buyer to network to get that house sold.
So when you're having that upfront conversation with Jason, when you're going out on a listing, how often is this coming up? Is this something that veteran sellers are thinking of? Hey, I have this advantage. I have this lower interest rate. How does this help me? Am I going to get $1 million more for my house because I've got a 2.5% interest rate?
I don't know if I would say the sellers are always thinking about it. I mean, there's a couple that are like, hey, you know, can we do an assumption, or can we, you know, list it as assumption? I would say that's actually probably less than common. Normally it's something that we'll bring up, is like, hey, well, you know, what is, you know, typically when we're doing a seller's comp and kind of, you know, putting all the fees together in that, and we find out that, hey, their loan was VA, if they weren't prior clients or whatever, we're going to be like, hey, you know, what's that interest rate? You know, we'll also list it as being assumable, because it can be. And same with an FHA. I know everyone always talks about VA being assumable, well, especially embedded VA, but you know, we've actually had a veteran buy or assume an FHA loan, and it's very much the same from an assumption standpoint. And so from a veteran buyer, buyers can look at, if they have that type of funds, can assume. But I would say it's definitely common. The biggest problem we probably come into is that because we're been a high appreciation mark during COVID, is that, like, if you bought in 2020, you probably have so much appreciation that the gap isn't there. However, if you maybe purchased in like 2023, kind of wherever that cross where the interest rate started to kind of climb up, and you kind of got in right around that period, you maybe don't have as much appreciation. So that gap to do the assumption, and those are the prime homes for an assumption if you're listing right now.
So we talked a little bit at the top of the show that all real estate is local. So if you want to say, hey, you know, Resi Club did their meta-analysis. They had 26 real estate experts around the country, polled them, and the median estimate is 1.43% appreciation this year. But do you care if that's the median for the entire nation, if you're in a condo in Southwest Florida and they're dropping like a rock, or if you're in Massachusetts, where prices are tough, things are still going up because it's a very tight market? How do you guys address and coach sellers in different parts of the country? You guys are in two very different markets. In Tennessee, what does that look like? In San Diego, what does that look like? Because we've also seen the numbers that a home that's overpriced to begin with is going to take longer to sell and sell for less. The seller's like, well, we can always come down, but they don't really understand what that does for them over the long haul. So, Jason, how are you walking folks through that when they're making that pricing decision?
We allow self-discovery by providing the education. So our MLS here provides monthly stats. They're historic stats by following, you know, prior 1 month. So we'll see a trend for every zip code here in San Diego. So we can actually pull up and say, hey, here's what the zip code looks like. Here's the median price point, average price point. They're getting 101%, or they're getting, you know, 97% of asking price. which is great data, and that's just what it is, right? But that doesn't necessarily affect their home. Then when we actually pull the comps, so we have their home, and then we pull some of the listing homes around there. We actually pull up their photos and print them out and say, all right, here's the home that sold a week ago across the street. Here's what it looks like. Here's what your home looks like. They're very comparable, but like maybe they painted their home or they've updated it, or maybe they haven't. Maybe it's a wreck. Either way, that's going to kind of change the price point. And then we also look at how many days on market was it. The neighbor's house, was it on market for 2 weeks? Was it on market for 60 days? We don't want to be on market for that long. That means it's 2 months maybe. And then we look at the history and say, hey, that home's dropped price 4 times. All right, well, we don't want to be that person, right? The longer it sits, they took it off the market, put it back on the market. Like, we want to nail that price point, even though it may not necessarily be what you think your home's worth. Realize that the longer it sits, even though if we shoot for the stars, but it sits for 2 months, 3 months, those are 2 or 3 more mortgages that you're having to pay while you might be already PCS to Hawaii, wherever, and stressing about that. So if we can try to hit it and get it, maybe within the 30-day period or even less, then that's what we're really shooting for. And that's kind of, really self-discovery. Hey, look at these photos. What do you think? Does your house look like this house? Does it look like this house? I feel like that's a very, when you have that option anyway, it's a very easy way to kind of be like, oh yeah, my house doesn't look like that.
And Alexis, does that match up pretty well with the conversations you're having in Tennessee, or different market, different conversation?
It's different. Everything's always going to be different here because, well, hello, we're in Tennessee, okay? Not San Diego, where people are like waking up every day wanting to move there. I'm in Memphis. Most people don't wake up saying they want to move here, all right? But
people that like barbecue and music. Right?
I'm not going to start talking about. I do love this city, but back to this topic at hand. I like to, as an agent, I don't want to know what somebody else is doing based off pictures. I'm going to have to call. And I'm going to call, hi, your house is listed like I got a buyer. No, I don't, but I'm calling that agent. Okay, why the heck you been sitting for 6 months? Because sometimes the sellers are just ornery. Jason, you know that, okay? Somebody's shooting for the moon and then taking down the whole neighborhood with them, right?
We definitely called too.
Yeah, right. So I try to call to investigate what's going on. So that way too, I'll tell you right now, I'll pivot when somebody's calling about my list and tell them, hey, come over here. But to kind of gauge on price, understand that 95% of my clientele, they're PCSing out of here where it's a Navy base, and most people it's a one and done tour. Okay, they're not really coming back. They're either maybe retiring here or they're one and done. Again, every duty station is going to be different. Every city is going to be different. But my MLS is also weak. It's a mid-level city. I'm over here drooling hearing Jason talk about this fun stuff in San Diego. It's low budget here in Memphis. So I actually have to do the data myself.
You're not getting hired by the tourist bureau in Memphis in any way, shape, or form. You need to be a cheerleader for your city.
I'm keeping it real because I'm a transplant here. So all my clients are moving here. I'm trying to be transparent and educate you because you don't know what you don't know when you move to a new city, right? When you're PCSing on military orders, you don't know what you don't know. So I try to be the local guide in my city, but this is the truth here. So trying to deep dive into pulling comps and stuff. We're not a very transient city like San Diego. So we might not have a comp in the neighborhood. The last sold might be 6 months ago, or it might be a few streets over, or it's like one street over. That's a different school district, for example, which is going to pull different numbers. So really trying to land a price. Most of the time my sellers are looking for my guidance. 4 or 5 years ago during COVID, it was a little bit different. We just go in there, oh, hi, you're going to sell it, but a lot of it here kind of goes into that strategy I've been talking about, making sure your house is ready to go because you have one shot. Here in my market, homes are sitting. I go in telling them if we don't get an offer within the first 2 weeks, we could be sitting probably up to about 120 days. We have lots of months of inventory here. So meaning everybody has options. Everybody's cute right now, but doesn't mean you're going to be asked out on a date, so you have to find a way to strategize to stand out when it comes to pricing, presentation, all of that. Also with the description, if the seller has enough equity, if you are about to list your house, if you have enough equity to offer a rate buy down, if something is wonky about your house, but you're apprehensive of putting the money in up front, or you don't have the money in cash on hand, but you're willing to offer a credit, advertise that. That's the type of market that I'm in right now. Does that
Okay,
make
so
sense?
you're having that conversation up front because that's great. So
Yeah.
pricing is a piece of it.
Yeah.
I want this much, but what am I willing and able to do?
Right.
And we don't even need to talk about the way it relates to VA financing because the buyer may not be VA. You
Mhm.
talked about all of the different loan programs you need to be well versed in, but all of them offer the ability for the seller to make some concessions that can make their home more attractive. What does that conversation look like on the front end when someone is talking to you about selling their home?
I just go in. Well, first we got to know what do you owe on the house, you know, because it's nice to have a conversation about rate buy downs, but if you don't have any cash, no equity in your house, that's not going to work. Before I kind of get into that, I will like to touch on that. I know we just talked about assumptions and stuff. Last year, 2025, I had two sellers, two clients that were going to list their house. Instead, they ended up to networking off market with two guys from their command coming in to do an assumption with their house. So see how that kind of worked out there too. Okay. So if you don't have equity, you got somebody coming in and you have like a 2023 rate, which is still a little bit lower than where rates are today, you can maybe perhaps network with somebody to do an assumption because that could kind of help relieve some stuff if they have the cash on hand. But what does it look like? We start talking about numbers, depending on what you owe in the house, and the numbers are going to vary market to market. So numbers when you go to sell your house, here in my area, because homes are sitting so long, closing costs. I mean, you're sitting 120 days, 180 days. Trust me, someone's asking you for closing costs. Okay, that's just how it's going to be. In my market area, depending on the area, it could be 3 to 4% of the sales price of the home. That's about what we average. So having that conversation up front, discussing commissions. That's something else too. Discussing closing fees such as HOA, taxes, how taxes work here. That sort of stuff.
So 100%. What does that conversation look like, Jason, when on the front end? Because it's all numbers, right? Pricing. I want X about my house, and then I owe Y. Okay, well the difference really what we care about. What are they wiring to my bank account when this closes? So what are all of the things that need to be accounted in there? Alexis hinted at several of them, but walk us through what that conversation looks like when someone's meeting with you up front and preparing for their PCS and needing to list their home.
Well, one of the things we'll do is when we're getting back to the comps and kind of putting a sheet together, we'll actually send it to title and get like whoever title and escrow who we normally use, get kind of a rate on what they would normally charge, and actually give them kind of like what their estimated walk away number would look like based on what they owe, our kind of estimated selling price, and that kind of gives them an idea of like, hey, we're either going to have to come up with a certain amount of money because that's definitely happened, or we are walking away with a certain amount. And then of course, once we get into, we're actually listing it kind of like Alexis talked about, talking about the buyer's compensation, or, it's still standard practice here in San Diego that the seller's paying that, and realize that, you may be negotiated for that, and be aware of that. Like, don't be like, hey, oh my goodness, that's, another fee, because we want to make them aware of, hey, the listing agent's commission, buyer's agent's commission, closing costs, potential taxes, HOA transfer, pest inspection here in San Diego, plus potential covering repairs if it's negotiated. And then of course what is found during the inspection and what they may or may not ask for. Closing costs can be sometimes negotiated and sometimes they're not. It just, every home is so unique that it's really that conversation with the agent at that time. And the discussion you have with Alexis today would have been drastically probably different if you were talking to her listing your home back in 2022. Like the same home, you know what I mean? Like same general area, same home, but because of how the market changes, weekly in some cases. I mean, I'm sure Alexis probably feels there's times where we'll be out, looking at homes, driving around or browsing the MLS, and over the course of 2 days, we can start to see the market change. And like before it even comes out, before, Housing Wire or anything, any local or big data comes out, agents, if they're really following the market, you can start to see like, hey, we're in a little bubble. You know, we see a little price drop and all of a sudden we see a little bubble. And it's like, hey, this is a good time to jump in and buy, or this is a good time to list your home because you're going to get maybe a little bit more, or might be a little bit quicker out the market. And we see that.
Something that you said is important, that each situation is unique. A lot of the topics that we cover here on the show, especially when they're loan related, it's like A to Z. We can go through and it's loans 101, it's Earl 101, that type of stuff. I think selling a home is more unique and personal to each specific situation, especially when the PCS is involved. So with that, we've covered most of the universal stuff. But any kind of final pieces of advice that are somewhat universal, or just that one would want to make sure they're getting covered in their scenario? Alexis, I'm going to give you the last word. So we're going to start with Jason.
Actually, you should just give it to Alexis, because I'm not actually coming up with
You may
anything.
not get the mic back if we give it to
Yeah.
Alexis, but we'll go. Alexis, you are going to go first then.
All right. So last advice, listing your home, be list ready when PCSing, right? PCS ready was the name of this topic. No, PCS orders, how to be ready in a tough market. That's this live. How to be ready, you got to stay ready, okay? So if you got orders in April, you should have talked to someone in November, all right? Stay in constant contact with your real estate agent. Find someone who, communication is huge, obviously, in real estate, but when you're selling your home, especially in a market that's a little bit slow, even in sunny San Diego, it's a little bit slow, right? Competitive markets, they're still slow. Find someone who's going to have a good conversation with you and educate you. It can be scary. You have to keep your head level, keep a level head. Know that everything typically does work out. Everything does work out. It's just about staying ready, understanding your numbers, and having more than one plan. We talked about rentals quite a bit. That's plan B or plan C for someone. Always have a backup plan. That's incredibly important. And, also, here's a great one. So it's supposed to snow here in my area this weekend, right? I've already contacted a couple of clients who are going to be listing their home this year to say, if your home gets good snow, get out front and take some pictures so we can include those in the listing photos so people can see what your house looks like when it snows, right? Or if you're going to be a winter PCS and you're in an area like mine, or early spring PCS, everything's dead. Memphis is kind of, we get all 4 seasons here, believe it or not. So have pictures, exterior pictures taken, so potential buyers can see what your home looks like in the summer when everything's lush and green and you have a sparkling pool ready. So it's just about staying ready and ask questions. Don't be intimidated, and please don't rely on AI for listing, because just like Jason said, data changes day to day around here. Okay, it's America 2026, so everything's changing constantly. So make sure you just stay ready by staying in the know.
Perfect. So appreciate you guys sharing the knowledge and expertise tonight. Really, it's a unique topic in that there's a million different angles this can take. So the most important thing that my takeaway is from listening to the two of you and listening to Rocky in terms of the loan piece and how it can play in there is just get prepared. It's never too early. Get with an expert who knows the program, who knows what you're going through, who can either has the answers or can get you the answers that you are looking for. So if you need someone who can do that for you, you can go out to the map at vettedva.com. You can call Alexis if you're in Tennessee, or Jason in San Diego. But if you're looking for someone on the mortgage or the real estate side, go out to the map at vettedva.com. We have local experts who can help you or get you connected with someone in your area who can. If you got questions that we didn't answer here tonight because we're talking about listings, go out into the Vetted VA Facebook group and throw your question up. There are always expert moderators there who can get you correct and accurate answers at all times. So again, appreciate the three of you joining us tonight and sharing your expertise. I will not be back next week. Jerry's going to fill in and host next week because I have a prior commitment, and we're going to talk about tips on how to win in a slower market, which again, it varies with where you are around the country, but they're going to go through all of the details on getting your VA offer accepted in a different market. So again, thank you to the three of you. We will see you guys next week.